Good evening, everyone. I'm Beth Contos. I'm a social studies teacher from Salem High School, and I'm on leave as I serve as president of the American Federation of Teachers, Massachusetts.
Good evening, everybody. Hi, Beth. Welcome back. I'm Mary Najimy. I'm the president of the Massachusetts Teachers Association. I, too, am on leave currently from a kindergarten class in Concord, where I have been an elementary school teacher for just about 30 years.
Great. It's wonderful that everyone could be with us here tonight for our third forum in a special series on COVID-19 and schools. We're proud that this forum is being co-hosted by the American Federation of Teachers, Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, the Massachusetts Coalition for Occupational Safety and Health, and the Massachusetts Public Health Association. We're at a critical juncture in our fight against the coronavirus. There's a lot of hope on the horizon, that's for sure, with safe and effective vaccines now being rolled out to the public, and starting with our healthcare workers and most vulnerable populations, and then extending to educators and other essential workers and to the public at large. At the same time, there is a lot of cause for concern. The vaccine rollout is going more slowly than hoped, and there are worries that the vaccine supply won't be able to keep up with demand, and that vaccines won't be distributed in an equitable fashion. That's always our concern too. Add to that the emergence of potentially dangerous COVID-19 variants, and it's clear that we can't let our guard down for 1 minute as we head into this critical stage of the pandemic. It's important to note that everybody here tonight wants schools to reopen as soon as possible for in-person learning. But we, of course, must do this in a safe way that does not contribute to more viral spread and illness. It is equally important to note that many families share the concerns of building safety and are choosing remote learning, which is coming at a great cost for far too many families. Mary?
And there's a lot of buzz this week about the CDC saying that educators being vaccinated is not a prerequisite to returning to school. We want to take a moment to shine the full light on what Dr. Rochelle Walensky, the new CDC director, is saying, and also to note that we agree. She said that the data suggests that there isn't a lot of transmission in schools when the proper mitigation measures are taken. And I want to emphasize that word when, which is the word that the governor and the press seem to be leaving out of the narrative. The CDC has been very clear from the beginning that a variety of mitigation factors must be implemented together if buildings are going to be safe. Those strategies are ventilation to control infection, de-densification of the classrooms and the building, masking, hand washing, screen testing, contact tracing, and community rates must go down, which means the state needs to do a better job putting more restrictions and providing funding so that workers, families, and businesses have a lifeline during the pandemic. She also noted that the Advisory Committee on Immunization Practices has prioritized educators as essential personnel. And finally, Dr. Walensky is very clear, just like we are, that all of this takes funding. Our position, both the MTA and the AFT, has been consistent with the CDC's position for the last 9 months. So with all of this in mind, we have an esteemed panel of scientific and medical experts, as well as our own members who are educators and school nurses with us tonight to provide us with the big picture look at the state of the pandemic. And then we'll go into a deeper dive specifically around surveillance testing, I call it screen testing as well, in schools, which is being used to screen for COVID-19. So tonight our panelists include Alan Geller, who's with the Public Health School at Harvard. He'll talk about what the latest public health data shows. Are we trending in the right direction or the wrong direction? Regina LaRocque, an infectious disease physician at Mass General Hospital, and Regina has been with us in the past. Julia Kohler, who was our first guest on our first show, is a pediatric infectious disease specialist at Boston Children's Hospital. Both medical doctors, Regina and Julia, will talk about the new COVID variant that we're hearing about lately. And then it's a pleasure also to bring new guests to our program, Linda Lindsay, a third grade teacher in Medway, and Michelle Laracy, a school nurse in Watertown. They'll give us an in-depth, on-the-ground, first-hand look at screen testing in our public schools, how it's going, how people are reacting to it, and they'll be speaking from their own personal experiences.
Mm-hmm. Great. And as always, we want to hear from you. So if you're watching us tonight, you have a question, please put it in the chat. And we'll pause periodically to have the panelists answer them. And we also have some environmental health and safety committee members who will answer directly in the chat. But first, we have a question for you. So we're going to have a poll. We've done a poll in the past. To participate, you need to go to www.menti.com. I assume that's going to come up on the screen. There we go. It's www.menti.com. And there's a special code you put in. It is 4388300. Give you a second to get out there. And when you get there, there's a question. How much more comfortable would you be working with students in person if students and staff in your school were offered weekly COVID-19 testing? Okay, so 1 is no more comfortable. 2, a little more comfortable. 3, significantly more comfortable. 4, it's already being offered at my school. Let's see what we have there. So what do we have there, Mary? My screen's not quite big enough. Or wait a minute, my eyes are getting older.
It's looking like the greater number is yes.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I think we'll hear really from Linda and Michelle what the sentiment is on the ground. And people do need more information. We actually hope that tonight will help you walk away with that more information so you have a better understanding and can feel more comfortable.
Yeah. Yeah. Okay, so let's see. Is that enough time for the poll?
Yeah, I think we should move on. All right, so we're all subjected to an immense amount of data to COVID-19. We hear about the number of cases in the state, the number of Massachusetts communities with high transmission rates, and the number of reported cases of COVID-19 among children. But what does it all mean? Let's welcome Alan Geller, a senior lecturer on social and behavioral sciences at Harvard T.H. Chan School of Public Health, who'll help us understand what these numbers mean and how they're applicable to our daily lives. Welcome, Alan. Sarah, if you'd bring Alan on.
He's coming.
There he is. Hi, Alan.
Hello there.
Hi, Alan.
Thank you very much for the great introduction, and I'm delighted to be with everyone today. I think we can probably go to the first slide. Thank you. So I'll have 4 brief points to make this evening. The first one, the most basic, is that COVID-19 is very common among children ages 0 to 19 in the United States and Massachusetts. And in fact, there are more cases diagnosed in children right now in the United States and in Massachusetts than for any other age group. Second, we need to get a really good reporting system in place so we know what the extent of the pandemic is and how it affects children. Therefore, we need to look at the discrepancy that we see now between the numbers we get from DESE and the numbers that we get from the Department of Public Health. 3, We continue to have far too many high-risk communities in our state, and we have to ask the question, if schools do reopen or in the process of reopening, how can we make them as safe as possible for staff and students, particularly in those high-risk areas, which have been in remote settings for many, many months now. Next slide, please. So, you know, there used to be the old saw we all remember hearing not so many months ago, children really can't get COVID. And so I said, is that really true? So if we look at data published from the American Academy of Pediatrics, a very trustworthy group, and they rely on data from departments of public health all across the country, they tell us as of January 28th that there were nearly 2.82 million children have tested positive for COVID since the onset of the pandemic. Now that's of course across the whole United States. And we know that kids are more likely to be asymptomatic than adults. So we have to think that these numbers are well higher than 2.82 million children. There's an undercount. Not only are these numbers from the past, but we can see if we look at the second bullet that there's been a 12% increase in child COVID cases, COVID-19 cases, over this last 2-week period of time. So the rates continue to rise and rise precipitously among children. Next slide, please. Now, let's take a look at these next two slides. Here's the first one. This is for the first 5 months of the pandemic, March to July 2020 in Massachusetts. And you'll see there, while we were all in lockdown, and not to our great surprise, that there were fewer than 6,000 diagnoses among children during that period of time. And in fact, many other age groups, older people, middle-aged people, were far more likely to be diagnosed with COVID. But when we switch to the most recent period of time with the next slide, thank you, we see here now over the last 2 weeks, the group that stands out, the largest bar, are children 0 to 19 years of age, where over the last 2 weeks, we've seen nearly 11,500 cases. And you can see that they represent about 20% of all cases diagnosed in the state. Next slide, please. So keep that number in mind, and I guess you don't really have to do that because you'll see here on the second column, you'll see that same number again. And what this slide is trying to do for you is to show the number of cases as it's increased across the state as we go from November 4th to January 27th. And you can see here that it's increased about fourfold. But what I'd like to draw to your attention are the number of cases that DPH reports during this period and the number of DESI cases that are reported during this period of time. Now remember, DESI is only reporting on children who go to school, whether they're in a hybrid or a full-time setting. And we're not including daycare children, we're not including kids in private schools. But the word, it's strange credulity if we would ever imagine that there's only 624 COVID diagnoses in all of our children attending public school. If you do the math and you think about 250 districts that are open, that would mean only 2 cases every week per district. So any way that we're going to try and control this pandemic and get a good sense of how serious it is, we've got to have real numbers. And the last slide, I'm going to make a push for you all to send me your dashboards, which I know are spectacular, where we'll get very different cases. So if we look at the cities where all of you teach in, there's many that have been well in excess of 80 or 90 cases per 100,000. But these 9 cities in order, and you can see they stretch every single part of the state, have the highest COVID rates. And this means an incidence of 100 cases per 100,000, which very simply means that if you lived in a city with 100,000 people, every day in your city, there would be 100 new cases of COVID being diagnosed, and you can then just estimate that 20% of them would be in children. So let me just go to the next slide just to see if we can put this in perspective. So here's one city, and again, these are all phenomenal public health leaders leading the charge in every single one of these cities. But let's just take a peek at Gardner. where you saw just in the slide before, that has the highest rate of COVID in Massachusetts now. And just look at the numbers and try and imagine this to be real people. We see here on November 12th in Gardner, in the 2 weeks preceding that, there were 63 COVID diagnoses. And you can see the numbers as they go up to now January 21st. Just a few months, actually 2 months, that has risen to 389 cases every 2 weeks in a city of 20,000 people. So imagine sort of the difficulty in thinking about going back to school safely, but this is what we want to try and think about and how we can best do that. Next slide, please. So a couple of basic tenets. Let's think about it first from a community's perspective. So, there was an article that came out from the CDC that got misrepresented in the media to say that the CDC was recommending that everybody goes back to school. But no, they weren't saying that. The first point that they were making is that the community rate has to drop. We've got to be able to think of all steps necessary to reduce community spread before we send kids and teachers back to school. And I think, and a number of other people think, that we have to at least prove before we go back that the community rate has to begin to drop, and we have to see some consistency in that drop. We can't send kids back to the Gardners and the Lawrences and the Chelseas and the Great Barringtons of the world until we begin to see some kind of drop. And I think this is a realistic thing to call for. So that's the perspective from the community. And I think as the last slide that I'll show is in some ways recapping what Mary was talking about, but here's from the school perspective, the basic tenets for a healthy return to school for students and educators. And I'm thinking about it again for these high-risk cities. So we have to ensure more than a sufficient supply of masks, soap, and hot water. I think one of the things that would be of great assistance is for the state to call together people who have had successful programs in their schools where they've done an excellent job reducing transmission, to be able to have some advice and to be able to talk with folks who are opening up now. Second, we can't go from soup to nuts. We can't go from a situation where a school has been fully remote to full-time in person with a full giant classroom. We have to return via a hybrid model where we respect social distancing. The other idea is to bring in a few grades at a time. Let's see how it goes if we bring in the K through 2s. Evaluate it. See how many cases arise, hopefully very few. And we should be having district-wide health advisory boards in all of these cities. These have done wonders in the cities where they've tried it. Mary talked, and obviously this is going to be the thrust of the conversation tonight. There should be testing of all returning teachers, staff, and students. Remember, my main point is if we have high rates of infection in the community among children, we can't have a situation where every single kid comes back into our schools without some kind of prior testing program. Finally, ensuring maximal ventilation and filtration. And the last part, we're saying as part of a package to try and reduce transmission and to make schools safe, particularly in these high-risk areas, we should at least be aiming for 2 vaccinations or both vaccinations for all teachers and staff. We're not saying that this should be something that has to happen, but I think it should be part of the conversation that we have when we think about these other larger mitigation strategies. So, thank you very much.
Oh, that was great.
And sorry, the last slide, please. I'm begging you. Here's my email address. I think we can really do a very nice democratic process led by all of you. Send me your COVID-19 dashboards. I have seen the ones in Belmont and Needham and Taunton, which are just phenomenal, where we get really good, accurate daily counts. And if we can get a handle on those, we can do a much better job on our own trying to give a very good sense of what the real numbers are in the school.
Yes.
Thank you again.
Yeah. And Christine Broder, I think it's Jusami, is asking if the MTA could share these slides. Alan, if you would be so willing, we could put these slides up on our Facebook page.
That'd be great, of course.
Mm-hmm.
That's it.
And, Alan pointed out what's so important here is he's talking about specifically the highest, the cities with the highest infection rate already. They are the ones that are fully remote. I know some of my cities are Lawrence, Lowell, Lynn. Certainly Boston is just starting to bring some high needs kids back in small numbers. But we can't forget that we have to have social distancing and ventilation. And when we talk to Lindsay later, she can bring up some of the things that her school did to make sure that along with the pool testing, that these other things were all in place and have made a great difference. Any other questions there, Mary?
No, I think a couple of educators are really pointing out their concerns in terms of, restaurants are limiting the number of people that can eat, but our school cafeterias, when they open, have 20 students at a time without masks. Again, we just have to constantly reinforce the idea that it's the combination of mitigation strategies is what's going to make our schools safe. And I cannot emphasize enough just how much funding matters here, right?
Right. And it's perfect, Mary, because all the mitigation strategies that Linda is going to talk about, if we get that chance, all of them cost her district a good deal of money.
Right.
Because they hired extra teachers to spread the kids out. It really makes a huge difference. You can't do this kind of mitigation on a shoestring.
That's right.
Now,
so Beth, shall we move
on? Yeah, yep. Sure. So now it's time to bring on Julia Kohler, who is an MD, pediatric infectious disease specialist and assistant professor of pediatrics at Harvard Medical School Association, and Regina LaRocque, an infectious disease physician and researcher at Mass General Hospital and associate professor of medicine at Harvard Medical School. Both will help us to understand more about the new COVID variants and what all this means to us. Remember, our goal is not to sow fear, but to equip us with knowledge that can inform our decision-making. So welcome, Regina and Julia. Thank you for being with us here tonight.
Thank you so much for having us. It is really a pleasure to be with you, Mary and Beth, and I really appreciated hearing Alan's very detailed review of the data in Massachusetts. It's really a topic we touched on at the last forum, which are some of the real limitations of our data gathering in public health and infectious diseases in the state and nationally. We have some real limitations. So Julia and I just wanted to touch on emerging science over the last 2 weeks, really, that has added some extra urgency to the concerns about community transmission that Alan was raising in his presentation. So I think everybody who's following the news is aware of the emergence of a few variants in the COVID, the virus that causes COVID. And frankly, these are a change in the dynamic of the virus that really is important and is something we all should be thinking about as we look to the mitigation strategies and the vaccination programs that are rolling out. So I just wanted to briefly touch on what it is that is happening to make sure everybody understands that. So the coronavirus is a type of virus that is a very sloppy virus when it replicates. Any virus has as its purpose to infect a human cell or another animal cell and replicate, make copies of itself. And what we've seen now in the setting that we're all faced, where there is so much viral replication going on, so many people who are infected, that we have seen by chance, probably, the emergence of a couple of different variants in the virus where the genetic code of the virus has changed, and it's changed in a way that offers the virus some advantages. This is evolution in action. So these viruses that have emerged, and they've emerged in a couple of different places around the world, have proven themselves to be very concerning because of a couple of different reasons. The first being that we have clearly seen epidemiologic evidence that these variants are much more transmissible than the variants that had been circulating before. So when they emerge in a population, they quickly take over. and they therefore can kind of overwhelm the system quickly. There also has now been a couple of different lines of evidence that show that these variants also are not quite as amenable to the activity of the immune response that is generated by some of the current vaccines. So it doesn't mean that the vaccines don't work against these variants. It just means that they don't work quite as well as they against some of the other ones. They're still very important tools in our toolkits, the vaccines are, and we need them. So the point to this being that the story of the pandemic has been that new information emerges over time, and we need to be nimble, and we need to respond to that information when it occurs. And what we've seen here is that, really because of our failure to get this under control before, we're now facing such high rates of transmission that the virus continues to get an upper hand on us. And so now is the time when we need to be doubling down on all of the efforts that we've been working on for so long, with masking and distancing and ventilation and testing, and now vaccination as well. These are all things we need to be doing at maximal amounts. And we need to be paying really close attention to what the virus is doing in response. So I think that the point being, this underscores the importance of what you're going to hear about with testing as another tool in our toolkit for keeping things under control. Mm-hmm. Julia, do you want to add anything to that?
I just want to highlight among the great points you made, Regina, that these viruses, the most concerning variants, because variants arise all the time, have arisen in 3 parts of the world where there has been out of control viral replication, and that is South Africa, the United Kingdom, and Brazil. The reason is that the more opportunities the virus has to make multiple copies of itself, the more opportunities it has to try out which ones can infect the next person most efficiently. The more it has that chance for trial and error, like a trillion-fold, the more efficiently those more transmissible and also less immune-controlled variants are going to emerge. This country does not have the surveillance to detect those variants at this point. Of some of those variants that were imported from Brazil, South Africa, and the United Kingdom in this country have been found, but it is likely that we have also bred some of them right here in this country because we do have that uncontrolled viral replication. So the reason this is important in this context is several-fold, and I want to just highlight one, which is that the efforts of the teachers to block viral transmission in schools is important, not just for the children and their families, and for the teachers and school staff, educators, janitors, bus drivers, and their families. It is also important for the community at large, because the more we have uncontrolled viral transmission, and in some locales, schools actually have been vectors and incubators of uncontrolled viral transmission, the more we have that, the more we are going to give the virus opportunities to, with its trial and error methodology, generate versions of itself that can infect us better, that can escape our immune system more efficiently. In other words, whether we've been infected previously or whether we've been immunized, it will escape. And thirdly, in some cases, to cause more severe disease. So I would say the work of the teachers here and in, throughout the previous months in the state has been hugely important for all the communities in our state, because we do need to block viral transmission by every means at our disposal. And as Regina mentioned, we've been talking about the fact we need to get to zero COVID. That is the way that we will not have more escape variants, more transmissible variants arising. And that's a subject for another day.
Right.
I like to say, Ellen Johnson Sirleaf, I believe, said it best, that no one is safe from COVID until everyone is safe from COVID.
Exactly.
That's right. That's right. And, you know, Michael Sullivan is asking if we can advocate to get a vaccine program like New York. Beth, I'm going to give a preview of our really exciting news. You know, the public sector unions, the firefighters of Massachusetts, the Massachusetts Teachers Association, the AFT are teaming up. We've come up with a plan with a medical distribution company to actually set up vaccination sites in one school building in every school district so we can start vaccinating educators. We want to launch a pilot in 20 municipalities so that we can see how it goes. The firefighters and the EMTs are trained to vaccinate. And what we really need is Secretary Sutters to give us the green light. Imagine us going through 120,000 Massachusetts public school educators and bringing in higher education faculty and staff, because they are currently, some of them are currently working on campuses or in clinical settings. So we're on the cusp of being able to start a vaccination program. We're asking you, our audience, to stay tuned. If we don't get a green light from Secretary Sutters, we need you to express to her the urgency of the issue and partner up with us. So we are taking steps in the right direction, and vaccinating educators as well as pool testing are two factors that when, and I want to emphasize when, as Dr. Walensky says, when combined with ventilation that can control infection, physical distancing, PPE, hand washing, are going to be the things that are going to help us get back to more in-person learning sooner. Regina and Julia, thank you so much for your expertise. And let's now actually turn to the program of testing in schools. Beth, why don't you get us started and explain what DESE, the Department of Education, has actually laid out for us?
Right. So since the summer, we've been in pretty constant conversation about the need to do some preventative pool testing. It wasn't pool testing at the time, but some kind of surveillance testing to see who's coming in our buildings. Are the kids or the adults asymptomatic carriers, and how can we eliminate them, find out who they are, eliminate them, go home, go see your doctor, get better, then come back, so that we know that, or we're reasonably assured that the people that are actually in the building are well and not spreading the virus, right? So it took a number of factors, and a key factor is financing. It's not cheap to do this, but the cost of testing did come down, and there's a will. This has been going on, and so they heard our voices, and here we are. We're talking about who's eligible. A school district or an individual school that raises their hand and says, I want to do this, right? If you have any kind of in-person learning happening, it can be hybrid. It could even be small populations of students that are coming in the school. And this is for public schools. So any districts, charter schools, approved special education schools, and collaboratives can participate in this. There will be test kits that are supplied by the Department of Education, and all the support personnel, the service providers, and the tracking software will be provided from DESE at no cost to the schools that want this until March 28th. Okay, so it's about 6 weeks of testing. Now that's I think a great start for us to see whether or not this is a program we want to continue with. After the 6 weeks, the districts can decide whether or not they want to continue it, and they would be responsible for the cost. And we have CARES money still available to districts that they can use to do this pool testing if they choose, okay? But I really wholeheartedly encourage everyone to participate at least in the first 6 weeks. I think this may be a way to interrupt the spread of the virus. So participating districts have to arrange for follow-up testing, either what the state provides, which is Binax now, or a different testing provider if the pool testing shows that one of them is a positive. So the pool testing itself gives you a response in 24 to 48 hours, and they're in bunches of, I think, 10. And if there's a positive in that 10, then those 10 people will be notified to do a follow-up, very quick test. It's only 15 minutes, and we'll know who among the 10 is the actual positive, or perhaps more than one. And they call it pool testing because they pool dosages together, tests together, and it's much less expensive to batch the testing. And that's how it's coming to us. So it's about $50 per pool sample, about 10 swabs. There are some monthly startup fees, but all of this is covered initially by the Department of Education. And I really hope everybody here is going to do it. We have, 355 districts in Massachusetts, I think. And let's see, how many, about 120, I think, are scheduled to start soon, next week probably.
Right. And just an important note that while the state is paying for it for the first 6 weeks, the federal money that President Biden has approved that is earmarked specifically for COVID relief to schools, there's $800 million coming to Massachusetts, can be used to pick up the cost after the state money runs out. And actually, the MTA has done a breakdown by municipality about how much federal money is going to your schools. I think we can put that that site, that link up on the screen. So you can go to our website, find how much federal money is coming to your school, and that can cover the pool testing. The other thing that I want to note to all MTA members out there, we want to urge your superintendents and school committees to participate in this surveillance testing program. Be at the table. You do have rights. You should have a say in how this rolls out. Be at the negotiating table with your superintendent to bargain over two very simple basics: who will administer the test and who will oversee it. And then ensure that there's a stipend or compensation for the staff who are administrating it and overseeing the program. And work with your field reps. The MTA has model contract language that you can use to make sure that the program gets bargained. And on that note, I'm going to turn it over. I'm going to welcome Michelle Larcy and Linda Lindsay. We're going to start off with Michelle. She's going to give us firsthand experience as a school nurse in Watertown about how this program is actually set up and how it works. And then we'll hear from Linda about what it's like as an educator to be on the receiving end. Welcome, Michelle.
Hi, everyone. So we've been planning this when we're shut down. March 12th, March 13th is kind of when everything closed down and the world came to a screeching halt. And we started planning our reentry back in the spring. So we knew we were going to be doing testing by the end of summer. We had it up and running by September. Granted, Watertown is a smaller district. We have less than 2,100 students and around 400 staff members. But we had high need students start in September right off the bat. And we actually started by offering individual PCR testing. That's the lower nasal swab, so not the one that goes all the way up and back. nasopharyngeal ones that tickle your brain. We had the lower nasal swabs, so super easy. The staff does it themselves. It was great peace of mind knowing that you are either starting the week off knowing that you're coming to work safe, or ending the week knowing that you're going home to your family safe. So that was a huge proponent with, I think, the comfort level of getting everyone back in school. We, like probably most schools, have cohort days. So it's cohort A, cohort B, one fully remote day just to keep everything even. And we actually started our pool testing right around Halloween. So I think that's been 12-ish weeks now. In that time, we've had 9 positive pools in that time frame, which means that I know you've already kind of explained the system, but we swab 10 kids at a time, and they are put into a tube, preferably kids who are all together in the same classroom. That way we kind of know who's been around each other. We're eliminating, casting a wider net, so it's kind of more centralized. And if we get a positive pool, we actually have the students return the next day, and they do the individual testing with the staff. And we work with a lab in Cambridge, the Broad Institute and CIC in Cambridge. So we're able to get our results usually within 24 hours, sometimes 48 hours if there's a backup. But it works great because then we're not keeping the kids out of in-person learning any longer than need be. I know other districts probably may not have the ability to have the students come and retest, but then they can go to any of the Stop the Spread sites, anything that's set up by public health. And I have a couple of notes. I know people were talking in the comments about the retesting expense. It actually is a lot more cost effective to do the pool testing than the individualized testing. The individual tests can run like $55 per person, as opposed to the pool test where you're paying about $10 per child. So if you have a good sign up and we can get them back in, the cost has actually been phenomenal. And I know the peace of mind that comes for our staff and our students even, it can't cut. So the funding is well worth it. And honestly, the kids don't even mind it. They come out, they have it down pat. I can test a class of 10 kids in under 3 minutes at this point. They come out, they blow their nose, they sanitize, they swab, they get a chance to chit chat. It's so seamless, and it's become such an easy part of their day that they all only have to do one time per week. They can go home. They know that they're safe in school. The teachers know that they're in a classroom that is safe. And we've caught 9 asymptomatic students since we started. So that's almost 1 student a week at least that we have kept spread from happening within the classroom. So we're able to identify them, quarantine them, contact trace for them. And it's, I'm just really happy that we've been able to get the ball up and rolling. And I really, really hope that other districts are going to be able to get it going for them as well.
Michelle, I may have told you I'm a kindergarten teacher. I've taught kindergarten, first, second, third grade all of my life. And working with young kids, it always takes them longer to manage things. How are the youngest students in Watertown actually managing the testing, and what kind of support are they getting?
We actually had one little girl today who said that getting her nose swabbed was the highlight of her week. And we were like, honey, you got to get out more. But she was super cute. So Massachusetts actually changed it so children of any age can actually swab themselves, as before it was 14 years or older. So now at my level, at the middle school level and above, everyone does their own swabs. 5th grade does their own swabs, but it's a little bit faster if we do it for the little kids. So they come up to us, they pull down their mask. We do 3 swabs each side. The test is done in under 5 seconds. And I think it kind of, everyone wants to be included. So even the kids who aren't testing, I think when they see that their friends are testing, it's getting them to ask their parents to sign them up, which is awesome. Right now we have a total of 1,187 students that we test every week, and just over 380 staff that we're testing every week.
Wow. And so what did the district have to do to get that much participation on behalf of parents?
Just sending out the word. We attached the link for signing up to almost every email that goes out. We've had it translated into all of the major languages that are spoken in Watertown. We work with the teachers. Each teacher, we kind of say, hey, your class on this cohort day doesn't seem to have a really high sign-up rate. Can you talk about it more? If you email the parents or chat with the parent, can you just recommend it? I think we're actually leaning towards making it hopefully mandatory for sports, if you want to participate in sports, to do pool testing, because that's the only, we haven't seen any in-school spread. The only spread we've seen has been amongst sports team where they're hanging out after games and after practice, which is kind of something that's a little bit out of our control. But if we can at least test all of them, we can catch who's asymptomatic quickly, and hopefully I want the spread to be zero, ideally, with the kids.
You know, when you say 9 people that you've caught as asymptomatic, I don't know what the exponential number is of that, but if you think of those 9 continuing on with life, not knowing, I just wonder how many extended family members in the community really could have been affected by those 9.
And we've had 18 positive staff members that we've caught, and we've been doing it for about 20 weeks for staff. And almost all of those staff did not either maybe had an inkling if they were a close contact, or didn't even know that they were symptomatic or carrying. So that was other ways we've been able to. And like I said, we've had absolutely zero in-school spread. So during the school day in the classroom, we have had no spread. And then the only issues have kind of been with the sports team. And that's the kids who carpool and they take their masks off when they're driving home together. And that's a little outside what we can control, unfortunately.
Yeah.
Right.
That
Jessica,
takes education. Yeah.
So there's a question from Sarah Dion about pool testing. When people test positive in the rapid test, they'll be sent home in the middle of the day. Like, what happens to that?
So we kind of have our cohort set up where our cohort A and cohort B alternate. So we don't have cohort A coming in 2 days and then a break and then cohort B. So we actually have a 24-hour grace period to get our results back. And then we call the parents. We say, hi, your student tested positive in a positive pool. Could you please come in tomorrow morning? We're going to provide you a test and you'll have your results, and hopefully they can come back to school the following day. If we do get the Binax rapid testing, we'll be able to test them right then and there. And hopefully we'll get the positive results within 15 minutes, half an hour, depends how fast the Binax results will turn around. And then those kids can just come right into school, everyone who's negative. And then the positive person would start their 10-day isolation at home. We'd contact trace for who they've been closely around and go from there.
And, Jessica Harris put a comment just in reaction. She said it doesn't sound too traumatic. I think she was talking about for students. Was it in the beginning? Like, what was the transition period like?
Oh, it was so easy. I think the very first day, all the kids thought it was the brain tickling one. And then one was like, you guys can pick your noses further than this stick is going to go.
Especially if you're in kindergarten.
Yep. And
they're experts.
We haven't had an issue with any students saying that there's been discomfort. If anything, a lot of the kids whose parents have yet to sign them up are kind of upset that they can't get tested, but we unfortunately can't do it without parental consent under the age of 18.
Right. And to be clear, Michelle, we are still saying masks and distancing and, the protocols of minimizing how many people are in a room at a time and leaving the mask on except to eat, and at certain areas, a mask break. Linda told me a mask break, you go outside, right? We can't forget that we have to have all the mitigation remedies in place.
Right.
And I will touch base. I just see one comment about how we can be sure there's no asymptomatic spreading because we're doing the pool testing weekly. If we have someone who tests positive 1 week and then we test that classroom the following week with those kids and there's no one else testing positive, that's how we know.
Yeah. Right. And I see another comment from Paula Berry. Why is the superintendent not interested in pool testing? I was shocked to read the Southeast Coast newspaper that New Bedford, I think Fairhaven, Acushnet, a handful of districts, the school committees and superintendents are saying no because it's a resource issue. This is why you need a union. Unionized educators need to reach out to families. Families and educators have to push collectively to say, we want this if we want our schools to be open. And then we have to fight forward together for the funding. There is federal funding coming to your district, so we cannot allow the excuse of no funding to be the reason why we don't do this.
Right.
And if for real the funding runs out, we have an initiative across Massachusetts to fight for progressive revenues coming out of the State House so that we can give aid like this to the schools who need it.
Right. And I want to point out that it's still, even though the deadline to sign up, it was a very loose deadline if your districts are not in, but they hear that another district is having success at this, you can still sign up. They have said very clearly to us that they're not going to turn people away if there's an earnest interest. And at the end of 6 weeks, if your district doesn't want to continue, then they don't have to. It's not a long-term contract. The 6 weeks is free. So maybe we should bring Linda Lindsay in here.
Yeah, let's go to Linda as soon as Michelle can answer Lourdes's question, because it is a technical thing that does have an answer.
Okay.
Yeah. Actually, at this point, you could technically do unsupervised testing without a nurse present, which is good, I guess, if you can get volunteers. We've had a couple parent volunteers who are nurses come in and help, but you can delegate the sample collecting to non-medical staff and just kind of have the nurse supervise everything, which is good. Especially now that the kids can swab themselves. Technically, you're not doing any invasive procedure. And once we have parental consent, you can set it up for the kids to do it themselves, as long as there's someone who's supervising, saying that it's, being collected in a safe and clean way. Not necessarily completely sterile like you're in an operating room, but in a clean and safe way.
Right. So Linda, what's it like for you to be on the receiving end as an educator and not the nurse having to run the program?
Well, we started our testing on December 8th, in which it was all staff. The superintendent said he needed at least 75 to 80% of the staff to agree with it in order for it to be affordable for the town. So we test every week. It's the PCR test, that Michelle was talking about. We administer it ourselves. We go to the office, we get our kit. Most of us do it at home and bring it in on a Monday morning. The superintendent's staff come around to each school. We have a time allotment, and we scan our QR code. They scan the little vial with the little swab in it, and it goes off to be tested. And 2 days later, we get the results. The superintendent gets the results from the testing company, and then he sends out like a blanket email that, everybody, the past, I want to say 3 or 4 emails, everyone's been negative. And if there is a positive, the principal of the school sends out an email to the school staff to say that somebody has tested positive, all contacts have been, contact tracing has been done, and, if you're a close contact, you would be notified. So it has been, it's been successful. I don't know how many are doing it, because I'm only in the memorial, the little school, the elementary school, but I want to say about 90%, 95% of the elementary teachers are doing it. Our school is 234, and we've only had so far 2 positive cases from the staff testing. Student testing, they had a webinar a couple of weeks ago. He sent out permission for the kids to start getting tested. And that's supposed to start next week. He also, and Michelle, you may know more about this than I do. He talked about there's going to be antigen testing in the nurse's office if either the staff or the kids don't feel well, they can go down and be tested. And I guess it's what, 15 or 20 minutes maybe for the result?
Yeah, a quick turnaround. The only tricky thing with that is the antigens would have to be present and they'd have to be symptomatic. Those tests can be a little wishy-washy, but they're still better than nothing, and you can get.
It was, you know, I don't, for the child, I don't feel good, you know, so they can go down to the nurse's office and get that test. And then results, you know, the nurse would probably, you know, call the home or whatever. The reaction is really good. I mean, the teachers want to keep going with this. And the superintendent said we're going to keep testing until we're all vaccinated. So it's going to go on. And he is definitely pushing for the vaccination. Our town bought a freezer so that they can store the vaccines. And this is for the whole town. So, you know, the DPW, fire, all that can all be tested. We have air purifiers in our room that run 24 hours a day. They you know, change the filters. There's a light that goes on, so the staff comes in, they change the filters. We have boxes of masks. We have boxes of gloves. We have, you know, antibacterial spray to shields.
And Linda, when you're saying this, I hear money, 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 money. Your district had to make a commitment early on to make an investment. And I think you told me they already, in addition to having portable ventilators, they did some fix on your ventilation in the whole school too.
Yes,
right?
The unit ventilators.
Yeah.
They open them up, you know, they open the
That's okay. We don't have to know exactly what they did. We just know
they did something to it. The special educators have the plexiglass shields in front of them and the nurse. These were some way back in the summertime. You know, our union president and representatives were saying, we're not going to go back until these things are met. With 6 feet apart, K-5 is back full time. There are about 10 to say 12 kids in a room because they started out hybrid, and cohort A and cohort B ended up being separate classrooms. So he hired more teachers. And they're in every room in the school.
Right. Mary, wasn't this what we were saying at the end of the summer? We don't need fewer educators.
Right.
More educators in order to do this well.
That's right. If we're going to cut class size in half, we have to double the teaching force.
That's right. And that's what they did in Medway.
Yep. That's what we did. And I mean, we're lucky that, you know, our superintendent believes in this and is pushing, because his goal is he wants to get everybody back to school. But it's not going to happen until he said, we get our second vaccine, and we'll roll it out slowly.
Yeah.
It sounds like you've made great progress, though.
So we are, yes.
Right.
That's terrific.
It's the right thing to do, and it's the necessary thing to do.
That's right.
So I want to thank all of you for being with us tonight. We're really coming to the end of the hour.
Yeah.
And I think, Beth, let's give a call to action right now.
Sure. Well, I need everybody to stay tuned. The AFT also will be distributing the ESSER money. This Saturday, we have an exec e-board meeting, and then after that, it'll be on our website, and everybody will know what is coming to their district that they can spend on these mitigation strategies, right? So this was a terrific forum. This is the third one, and we continue to be blown away by the combined expertise and knowledge reflected by the medical experts, as well as our educators and our nurses. They always bring personal experience, real life experience to these conversations.
That's right. And as educators, we know that knowledge is critical. But as unionists, we know that knowledge alone isn't enough. We have to act on that knowledge in a concerted, collective way to affect real change. So if you're a member of the MTA or the AFT Mass, your unions will be contacting you to enlist you in the collective actions that lie ahead, implementing a strong screen testing program that we talked about tonight, getting Secretary Sutters to give us the green light to work with the firefighters to get that shot into every arm of every educator, including higher ed workers, and fighting for the resources and colleges, the resources that our schools and colleges need to open safely that address the immense academic and social emotional needs of our students.
Definitely. And I do want to say that we're going to be pulling in for the public librarians too, because they are face to face with the public. So please stay tuned for the call to action. We will be announcing our next forum, our fourth forum. What's the date of that? Oh my goodness, it's going to be March, but we'll
I think
date.
it's the first Thursday in March. We're trying to make this
right.
regular the first Thursday of every month. So whatever.
Right.
I believe that's March 4th.
Excellent.
Yeah,
So that concludes our forum tonight. And thank you again for all you do. We do appreciate it. Our kids appreciate it. Our communities appreciate it. Stay tuned. Stay safe. Have a good
night. Stay connected in solidarity. Right. Good night, everybody.
Everybody.